Welcome, everyone. I'm Jennifer Beck with the Kellogg School of Management. Thank you for joining us today for our series, This is Kellogg, Becoming a Values-Based Leader with Professor Harry Kraemer. This is Kellogg showcases Kellogg thought leadership and initiatives important to the future of the school. You can catch up on prior webinars in this series at our virtual events page on the Kellogg alumni website. We'll put a link to that site into the chat now. Today's presentation will last 1 hour. You're invited to submit questions for Harry anytime using the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. We'll incorporate them into the discussion as time permits. I'm now pleased to introduce Harry Kraemer. He is an executive partner with Madison Dearborn Partners, a private equity firm based in Chicago, and he's a clinical professor of leadership here at Kellogg. He's been named Kellogg School Professor of the Year for the full-time program, as well as for the executive MBA programs in Chicago, Miami, and Hong Kong. He's the author of 3 best-selling leadership books. They are titled From Values to Action, The 4 Principles of Values-Based Leadership, Becoming the Best, Build a World-Class Organization Through Values-Based Leadership, and Your 168, Finding Purpose and Satisfaction in a Values-Based Life. He's the former chairman and chief executive officer of Baxter International. Welcome, Harry. Thank you for speaking to us today.
Hi, Jennifer. It's great to be with you and a lot of my former students and colleagues, and really looking forward to spending some time with everybody. And as Jennifer said, I really would like to make this informal. So if you have any questions or whatever, you can just put it in the Q&A, and Jennifer, you will just interrupt me as we go along, right? So that's great. Well, one of the topics that I've been asked to talk about, quite a bit is this whole topic of value-based leadership. And what I'd love to remind folks of, that you are not my former students, is I have very, very few answers, but like everybody on this call, I have many opinions. So I don't do Q&A, I do Q&O. And I'm going to give you a couple of opinions based on this. Basically, what I mentioned right up front is a couple of opinions. One opinion is most of us on this call are leading something already. So you could argue, well, I'm already a leader, so how much more is there to talk about? Well, one of my opinions is that leadership is not a destination, it's a journey. I actually believe every day I'm given on this earth, I can be better than the day before. So to me, the whole question is, what are the areas that all of us can focus on our journey to get better than we already are today? The other issue that comes up a lot when I talk with students, also executives, is, yeah, I kind of get this whole value-based leadership thing, but Harry, I've got people above me and they don't work for me, so not obviously how I can actually lead them. Well, here's another strong opinion. I don't think leadership has anything to do with titles and organizational charts. I actually think leadership has everything to do with the ability to influence people. And the only way I know how to influence people is you have to be able to relate to people. So very, very simple model: leadership, influence, relate. Okay. If I can figure out a way to really be able to relate to Jennifer, well, then maybe I can influence her, and then maybe I can lead her. So wherever we happen to be in the organization, whether we're just starting off, whether we're somebody in the middle, even if you're the CEO, guess what? Now you got this group of people above you called a board of directors. We could talk about that interesting insight. So this whole idea of, can I relate? Can I influence? And really, can I lead? So as I look at people that I'm interviewing, whether it's for boards I'm on, whether it's for topics if people are asking my opinion or references, I'm always looking at a couple of characteristics of value-based leaders and what I call 4 principles that I outlined in that very first book. So here we go. As I go through this, by the way, any one of these topics I could spend a couple of hours on, but Jennifer said, we've only got a certain amount of time here. So I'm going to summarize it, and then you folks can jump in and we can go a little deeper on any one of these that would be of particular value. And as I go through this, to the extent that you do see it as a journey, which of these would you say, I've got that one nailed? That one I'm pretty good at, but that one I could get a lot better, because it's a journey. So here we go. A couple of characteristics. The first one I love to focus on is the ability to keep things simple. And very often somebody will come up to me and say, Harry, I need to talk to you. This is very, very complicated. Well, I have to explain to them, guess what? Go back to your office, figure out a way to make it simple, and then we'll talk about it. And when they say, but Harry, it's pretty complicated, I'll have to say, well, you know what? That's why we have you. That's why we call it work. And by the way, if it was already simple, we may not need you. The other way I think about this is very often somebody will say, well, what kind of person is Joe? And they'll say, very bright, hardworking person, but he gets a little bit lost in the trees. He doesn't see the forest. I often think I've worked with some people who do not even get to the trees. Okay. And so they're actually in the root system. And I'll say, how good are you? How good is your team getting from the roots to the trees to the forest? How good are you at putting it all together? Because as you know, there are many people in organizations, they're in their little silo, they're in their little swim lane, but they have very little understanding how what they do fits into what we're trying to accomplish overall. So that ability to keep it simple, in my mind, is one of the hallmarks of somebody who's going to be a strong value-based leader. A second characteristic that I like to think about is common sense. And when I talk about this often with CEOs, they'll say, well, that's sort of obvious. I mean, obviously, we're going to use common sense. Well, I'm always reminded of my very favorite Mark Twain quote, who supposedly one time said, if you stop and think about it, everything is common sense. The problem is that common sense is not common. And when you look at what happens in most organizations, wow, it's sort of unbelievable. And for me, a lot of this comes down to the ability to effectively and clearly communicate, right? I mean, I got an email not long ago. It took me 15 minutes to read. 40 people were copied on it, and it literally read like a mystery novel. All right. I call the fellow, what do you want? By the way, when 40 people are copied on it and takes you 15 minutes to read it, that's 10 hours. And I said, Sam, we wasted 10 hours because you don't know how to communicate. So this ability to communicate, what do you want? Why do you want it? How does it fit into what we're trying to accomplish overall as an organization? Not just your area, but the total, in my mind, is what makes the most sense. So simple, common sense, through effective communication. The third characteristic that I see all the time is that the people that are the strongest leaders, and I saw this at Baxter, I saw this at Northwest Industries, I see this on many boards, the really, really strong leaders start leading ASAP. So simple, common sense, start ASAP, as soon as possible. And the reason I think that's important is that as I talk to leaders around the world, very often they'll say, you know, Harry, I wish we had more leaders. I wish we had more leaders. I wish people were more proactive, willing to take a risk, get out there in the open, try to do it. If we make an error, fine, pick yourself up and get going. And I hear this so often. In a way, it seems obvious that seems to be everywhere. But what always surprises me, and my students remember me saying this, the surprise is that the names of the people who almost always slow things down almost always have the same names. And people say, well, how could they have the same names? Well, here they are. And this is an example that I'll give you. Jennifer wants to get something done. I say, Jennifer, let's go. And Jennifer says, well, we can't do anything yet. We have to wait. So Jennifer, who do we have to wait for? It turns out the people we usually have to wait for is a group of people almost universally called those guys. Now, let me describe this group. It's both men and women, but we have to wait for those guys. And when you say, well, who are they? Well, we don't know who they are, but we're waiting for them. Okay. It's like waiting for a Godot. What are we waiting for? Right. And I really do believe the really strong leaders start to say, you know what? I am one of those guys. I'm one of the men or women, regardless of where I am in the organization. I'm going to lead. I'll be very respectful. In class, I usually say that 20 times. I'm going to be unbelievably respectful of people in the organization. I'll be very respectful of my boss. But if he or she wants to do something that I don't think makes sense, I think I sort of have an obligation in a respectful way to at least challenge them and let them know why, from my perspective, here's why that doesn't make sense. No, they're the leader. They may decide to do it anyway. And then I have to decide, is that an organization I want to be part of? So simple, common sense, start as soon as you can. 3 very, very key characteristics. Now, before I go in to talk about the principles, I don't know, Jennifer, is there anything that you want to jump in with, or I'm just going to keep going?
Yeah, if you want to keep going, I think that sounds great. We're starting to get some questions, so keep them coming. And
okay, all right. Well, you know what? More than happy to take any questions. You can always just stop me anytime. All right. So now I got 4 principles. I'll name them, and then I'll give you a little bit of a description of them as we go along, and then you folks can decide which of these would you like to do a deep dive on. But here they are in a very particular order. Number one, self-reflection. Number two, a balanced perspective. Number three, true self-confidence. And I always double underline the word true self-confidence. And the fourth one is genuine humility. And I always double underline the word genuine. Self-reflection, balance, true self-confidence, and genuine humility. So here we go. And the first one, by the way, if I was rewriting that first book now, I'd probably spend much more time talking about this first one because I think it is the most important one, self-reflection. What do I mean by that? Even though some of you on the video, I don't know, I would guess virtually everybody on this video has 2 or 3 times the number of things you'd like to do than you're ever going to get done. I don't mean to disappoint you today, but if you think about your job, your career, your family, maybe your spirituality, your health, a little bit of sleep occasionally, okay? A little bit of exercise, a little bit of fun. Hopefully, Kellogg folks realize we're here on this earth for a blink of an eye. Maybe we feel a moral obligation to make the world a better place. There's a lot to do. Okay. And the usual reaction, because we're all so conscientious, we'll just go faster and faster, right? This is where the multitasking kicks in. Okay. And then, of course, we got these devices, right? We got iPhones, Blackberries, Blueberries, all these great devices, which the great lie on my mind on these things is that it'll help us be more productive. Well, it'll make us more active. That's for sure. And here's a great question to stop and ask yourself. Have we confused activity and productivity? Have we confused? I think so. Okay. I mean, we're very active, but how productive are we? Or we would not even know. And I really do believe the most important characteristic of a value-based leader is you take the time to self-reflect. What do I mean? You take a small amount of time. You don't have a lot. You get off by yourself. You turn off the devices, get someplace quiet, and ask yourself a series of questions. And the types of questions I encourage students, executives, CEOs, anybody to ask are questions like the following. What are my values? What is my purpose? No kidding around. What really matters? What kind of a leader do I want to be? What kind of example do I want to set for other people? Right? At least for me, I'm not capable of thinking about these things when I'm doing 10 other things at the same time. But taking a little bit of time to think about this helps me separate out activity and productivity. It helps me get from the roots to the trees to the forest. It helps me put this whole thing together. Okay. Now, very often, and some of you may be thinking about this yourself right now, Harry, that sounds fantastic. Sounds fantastic. The problem, I don't have the time. Well, here's a challenge. Is it we don't have the time, or is this something we really don't want to do? This could get very sensitive, right? There could be a pretty big difference between what we say is important and what we're actually doing. And you know what? We may not want to go there, but we're talking about leadership. Leaders are willing to challenge themselves. Leaders are willing to put themselves out there. That's what leaders do. And by the way, when we say we don't have the time, guess what? Most of us commute someplace. Some of us try to exercise. You can do this when you're taking a walk, you're on an elliptical, whatever you're doing, or some of us actually pray or meditate, right? So is it we don't have the time, or is it something we really, truly don't want to do? Now, to give you a couple thoughts as to why this is important, it turns out, and this may be a surprise, it turns out that anybody on this call can figure out whether somebody else is self-reflective by talking to them for about 15 minutes. That's really all it takes. And the reason for that is that people that are not self-reflective, they're constantly surprised. They're constantly surprised. And one of my favorite lines is, I'm surprised you're surprised. Okay? Because if you take the time to be self-reflective, there's not that many things to be surprised by. All right. Most people on this call at one time or another, you didn't get the grade you wanted. You didn't get the job you wanted. You didn't get the date you wanted. Somebody you love and care about dies. It's all very unfortunate, but I'm not so sure it should be a surprise, right? I run into this all the time. I mentioned in class that there was a fellow I met at an airport, was a former student. Hey, Charlie, how are you doing? Well, Professor Kraemer, no, Harry, I'm just really surprised. What are you surprised by? Well, I now have 2 young boys. I have no relationship with my 2 boys. I'm just really surprised. Well, Charlie, do you spend time with your 2 boys? No, I don't spend any time with them at all. But he's surprised. I'm surprised he's surprised, right? In fact, I challenge all of you, just in the next day, I almost guarantee you somebody, it could be your coworker, it could be your family, it could be somebody's going to say to you, oh, I'm really surprised. And you should just ask them in a nice way. Why are you surprised? I'm kind of guessing you're probably going to say to yourself, I'm surprised you're surprised. Now, by the way, one of the benefits of self-reflection and minimizing surprise is that way you can actually decide what are you going to do to actually add a little value to your life. And what do I mean by that? There's a whole series of things, if we're honest, many of us deal with almost every day to one degree or another. And I'll put them under the topics of worry, fear, anxiety, pressure, and let's not forget about stress. Okay. Now, here's the problem. If you wait until it occurs, it's almost too late. If I wait until Jennifer is upset and I say, hey, Jennifer, don't worry, she's already worried. Okay. So say to yourself, well, wait a minute. Why would you wait until you're worried? Why would you wait until it happens? Why don't you ask yourself, what am I going to do when? By the way, every one of us deals with a crisis. Every one of us deals with a problem. It isn't a question of if it's going to occur. It's only a question of when. So why don't we decide what we're going to do before it happens? Okay. And one of the things I decided very long ago as a result of my daily self-reflection, I decided, what am I going to do when things go down? What am I going to do when there's an issue with the job, with my family, with my spouse, whatever? And I took the time to decide, no matter what happens, I will do two things. Number one, with a lot of people's help that are good value-based leaders, I'll try to do the right thing. Now, that is a big asterisk. What's the right thing? I really better make sure I've got good value-based people that I can work with that'll help me figure out in an uncertain world, what is the right thing? But number one, I'll try to do the right thing. Number two, I'll do the best I can do in the time allocated. Now, I'm giving you the speed version of a topic that I do in my class for about 3 hours. And it goes like this. No matter what happens, I'll try to do the right thing. I'll do the best I can do. I'll try to do the right thing. I'll do the best I can do. If you can actually convince yourself of that, worry, fear, anxiety, pressure, and stress can be significantly reduced. You can never eliminate them. Welcome to the real world. And we've all had bosses that would say, hey, Harry, a little bit of stress and pressure is not all bad. Okay. But this entire ability to be self-reflective is really, really key. All right. And again, I'm not talking about spending hours contemplating the cosmos. I spend 15 minutes a day, usually at the end of the day, going through a personal self-examination, and happy to send out the questions that I use. But this whole topic of self-reflection, and the reason why I get kind of emotionally involved in this is for a very simple reason. How can you possibly lead other people if you can't lead yourself? Right? And so think about it. If I'm not self-reflective, do I really know myself? If I don't know myself, can I lead myself? And if I can't lead myself, how could I possibly lead other people? Okay. Right. That's the short version of a long discussion on the most important piece of this, self-reflection. Number two, balanced perspective. Now, this one's interesting because if we were in a classroom together, I would ask you different questions. And it turns out no matter what the topic, the situation in the Ukraine, the situation in the Middle East, US presidential politics, that's an interesting one. You name the topic, and immediately people have very strong opinions, very, very strong opinions. The problem in my mind with people with very strong opinions is very often they have little understanding of anything other than their view. And I'm talking about something very different. I'm talking about, as a value-based leader, generating the ability to truly take the time to understand multiple perspectives. Taking the time to understand multiple perspectives. Or one of my favorite lines, supposedly from St. Francis, I seek to understand before I'm understood. I say that at least 10 times a day. All right. If I'm having a discussion with Jennifer and I have a disagreement, I try not to say, hey, Jennifer, I don't understand where you're coming from, because I've convinced myself that's a little ignorant. If I take the time, I can understand, then I'll decide, do I agree or disagree? All right. Because I want to be respectful enough of Jennifer, because she may want to go north. I think we ought to go south. I want to know why she thinks it's north, because you know what? If it turns out north makes more sense, I have zero problem saying, hey, I have no problem. I have no interest in trying to be right. I'm trying to do the right thing. And so that idea of a balanced perspective in my mind becomes overriding. And by the way, if I'm the boss, if I'm the leader, I'll make the final decision, but I'm going to make a much better decision if I get the input of the people on my team. And by the way, when somebody says, well, I don't know if their input's very helpful, well, then the obvious question I have is, why are they on the team? Okay, I want to have a great team that's going to help me figure out what to do before I make the final decision, if it needs to be at my level. Okay. Now, another area of balance, and this is one, Jennifer, if people want to discuss, happy to do it, is I think about this balance piece in terms of your whole life. All right. If I was with everybody, I'd ask for a show of hands. There's a famous expression that seems to be pretty global, and it's called work-life balance. Okay. Now, this is the one that's probably the most confusing for me, because I literally think of this work-life balance. It sounds like you're either working or you're living. Now, some of us are working enough that that's not living. That could be a problem. So many years ago, I stopped talking about work-life balance. I spend a lot of time talking about life balance. Life balance. And the reason why, most people are trying to balance their life. And when I wrote the third book that Jennifer mentioned, You're 168. And by the way, if we were in the room, I'd ask the simple question, why is 168 the world's most important number? Only about 1 out of 20 people know it unless they've actually been in my class. But it turns out, to give a little hint, they'll say, well, what's 168? And I'll say, when you're working really hard, really, really hard, how hard are you working? They'll say, I'm working 24/7. Now take a little sheet of paper out. 24 times 7, carry the 2. I'm a math major. You usually get 168. Okay. So in a world of uncertainty, the one thing I know is everybody on this call has 168 hours in a week. That's exactly what you got. And now the question is, how are you going to spend that 168? What are you going to do and what are you not going to do? And when I was interviewing people for this book, You're 168, I asked this very simple question of several hundred people. What does a life balance mean to you? And some people said, oh, there's 3 things I'm trying to balance. Some said 10. There's an amazing normal distribution related to 6. Okay. Very quickly, there's 1 bucket for your career. There's a bucket for your family and friends. There's a bucket for some of you for your spirituality, religious perspectives. There's a bucket for some people for health and getting a little sleep and exercise. There's a bucket for fun, going to the movies, playing a little ball. And there's a bucket, some people call it social responsibility. I call it being a best citizen. Okay. Career, family, spirituality, health, fun, making a difference. Now, here's an exercise. You can try this. Here's a little warning, though. Do not attempt this exercise unless you're in a really good mood. You want to be in a really good mood for this exercise. What you do, Jennifer, is you take those 6 buckets, and there's a column that's called the goal. What percentage of your time on average is key, would you spend on each of those 6? And I say on average, right? Because if you got to fly to Europe for the week, other things aren't going to happen. But on average, what percentage of your time would you put on each of those, right? The second column, very important, is current reality. Look at your calendar for the last 6 months. Where did you spend your time? And the third column is the difference. And I've yet to meet the person, I don't know, it could be Jennifer, who says, well, there's an amazing coincidence. My goal lines up with exactly where I'm spending my time. I haven't met that person yet. And the reason I don't think I have is I concluded in writing the book, I don't think it's possible to achieve life balance. I think you pursue it. And if you get pretty close, congratulations. If you're far away, I think you should ask yourself the question, is that because, well, I said my family was important or my health, but it really wasn't. Well, then, but if it really was, then you got to ask yourself, what am I doing, right? Really, really take the time to think through life balance, right? Because everybody on this call, listen, we're not on a sprint. This is a marathon. And we all know people that burned out pretty quickly because they didn't take care of their health. They didn't take care of their family, whatever. Now, I'm so open. If somebody says, you know what? My career is so important, I'm willing to sacrifice everything else. Now, for some of us, we'd say, oh, I don't think I'd want to do that, but it's their choice. The only thing I'm trying to figure out is don't be surprised. Because you know what? There's a lot of people that are surprised. And as I said earlier, I'm surprised you're surprised. Okay. So self-reflection, balanced perspective. The third one is true self-confidence. And as I said earlier, I never say self-confidence without true. Okay. And obviously people ask, well, what's the true? Well, no show of hands, but many of us have worked for people who can act very self-confident, who have no self-confidence at all. And again, because we've already talked about self-reflection, and I mean this very sincerely, any of you that want to think through whether you have true self-confidence or whether people on your team or somebody you're interviewing, I got 2 great questions for you. 2 great questions. Personally, question number 1, have you reached a point yet in your career where you're willing to say, I don't know? Hey, Jennifer, I don't know, but I'll tell you what, I'm not complacent. You tell me how fast you need an answer. I'll get you an answer because I know somebody who knows. Okay. But you know what? I'm just going to admit I don't know. Second question. Have you reached a point in your life where you're comfortable to say, I was wrong? Forget what I said. What Keith said makes more sense. Let's do that. Are you willing to admit you don't know? Now, the reason I love this topic is very often you realize, why is it that people don't want to admit they don't know? Why is it that they don't want to admit that they were wrong? Well, here's my thought. If Jennifer's my boss and she asks a question and I say, hey, Jennifer, I don't know, but I'll get you an answer. I'm a little worried she may think I'm not one of her best people. And by the way, I want Jennifer to think I'm really good. But guess what? Let's go back to the model. Leadership, influence, relate. Leadership, influence, relate. Here's an interesting thought. Most people do not relate well to people who know everything. Most people don't relate well to people that never make a mistake. I don't know how to relate to those people. All right. And when Jennifer asks a question, I say, I don't know, but I'll get you an answer real quick. I'm kind of thinking she may say, you know what? I don't know all the answers either. I can actually relate to her. If she can relate to me, I can influence and I can lead her. It works the opposite of what most people fear. Now, as Kellogg folks, this is obvious, but when I'm dealing with a younger person, I've got to go back to balance for a moment. Okay, here's the balance. If Jennifer's my boss, if every time she asks me a question, I say, I don't know, I have a much larger problem. Okay, I'll probably be unemployed, right? So you do need to know your job just to make sure we got a little bit of balance going on here. Okay, now here's another thought. Very often, and I was talking to a CEO not long ago, and he said, you know what? I've read all your books. This self-reflection, sign me up. I get it. Balanced perspective. Yep, I get it. But this true self-confidence, I got a real problem with this. Real problem. I said, okay, Tony, what's the problem? Well, I got 800 people working for me. There's no way I want to admit what I don't know. I hold my cards close. I'm not going to admit what I don't know. That's not going to do it. What do you think? So, well, I'm the guy who's got to explain to him, Tony, they already know what you don't know. They're wondering whether you know what you don't know, or is this whole ship going down? Okay. Now, here's another interesting thought. Mr. Graham, who was the chairman of Baxter for many years and one of the founding members of Baxter Healthcare, Baxter Travel at the time. One time he actually said to me, you know, Harry, no matter what job you're in the rest of your life, there's only two things you ever have to know. And by the way, I'm just passing on a little great perspective for all of you, because this is true for everybody on this call. No matter what job you're in, industry, area, doesn't matter. He said, there's only two things you ever have to know. I said, what's that, Mr. Graham? He said, the first thing you have to know is what are you really, really good at? What are your God-given gifts? What are your strengths? What do you got? He said, the only other thing you have to know is who knows what you don't know. I said, Mr. Graham, this is going to work out perfect. Okay. I got about 40 people who know what I don't know. I keep them very close, and I might as well admit what I don't know because they already know I don't know. Okay. So this ability to have true self-confidence, I got to tell you, it just makes the life much, much simpler. Okay. You know what you know, and you surround yourself with people who know what you don't know. Okay. And I usually have fun with that one because very often there was one woman who literally said to me, are you willing to admit what you don't know? And I said, I definitely am. She said, well, give me an example. I love to use the example when somebody says, Harry, what kind of heat do you have in your house? I say, I have hot heat in my house. Okay. I've never been in the basement of my house. There's something cooking down there. Okay. But you know what? I have got a heating guy. I have his name on the thermostat. Okay. I know what I know. I know what I don't know. Okay. I'm not going to get real anxious about it. Okay. That's why having a great team becomes very important. Okay. Self-reflection, balance, true self-confidence. The fourth and last one, genuine humility. And obviously, once again, I don't say self-confidence without true. I don't say humility without genuine, which raises the question, how do you know if you have genuine humility? And if you think you have it, do you really have it? Had to come up with one last question. Last question for you. You can use this one to determine your own level of genuine humility. And you can also use this very well for talking to people on your team, interviewing people. Here's the question. How did you get to where you are so far in your career? Okay. Most people on this call, you've done really well. You went to Kellogg. How did you get to where you are? Interestingly enough, when I was writing the second book and I interviewed a bunch of people, the top two responses to this, no matter where in the world I was, almost always were the same two. Harry, how did I get to where I am? Harry, I worked very, very hard to get to where I am. Number one. Number two, I have several skill sets. And working hard and skill sets, that's how I got to where I am. Now, If anybody asked me quickly, how'd you get to where you are? I'd say, without thinking about it, I'd say, yeah, I work pretty hard. I have several skill sets. But everybody in this call now is at least a little self-reflective, a little self-reflective. So let me tell you several that have impacted my career. I got 5 of them in no particular order. Number 1, luck. Let's pause a moment on luck. I was very lucky. Number 2, timing. Okay. Being in the right place at the right time. Now, some people combine luck and timing. I don't. I give timing its own area. And I don't know if this has happened to any of you, but there were several times I got promoted. The person who was in the job before me, when they were in the job, they accomplished nothing. You replace those people, you look like you walk on water, right? A couple of times I literally said, I'm just breathing. Makes big improvement over the last person, okay? Luck, timing. Number 3, the team, okay? I made reference to this before. When you're a single contributor, you want to make it look like it's all about you. As soon as you start leading people, it's not about you. It's, are you attracting the best group of people? Are you creating an environment where you're developing people to their full potential and creating an environment where people want to work for you? And if you're the type of person that people want to work for, you're going to do phenomenally well. Luck, timing, the team. The 4th one, mentors. I mean, there were several people, Dean Jacobs being one of them, Mr. Graham, another. If it wasn't for some of these people, mentors, there's no way I would have been in these positions. There's no scenario. I'm under no, illusion whatsoever. You never forget the people who helped you get to where you are. And as a result, maybe we have a moral obligation to truly help develop the people behind us, right? Paying it forward. Luck, timing, the team, mentors. The 5th one, a little bit more personal. This only applies to some of us. For me, there's a religious, spiritual perspective. I've received all of these talents from the man upstairs. I'm supposed to use to the best of my, it's not about me. It isn't about me. I learned that when I was about 2 years old. Okay. So these are talents I'm supposed to use, not about me. If any of those work for you, could be luck, could be timing, could be the team, could be mentors, could be a religious, spiritual perspective. If any of those work for you, I think what begins to happen is you never forget where you came from, because most of us start off with very little or nothing. You keep things in a perspective. All right. And by the way, I always tell senior people, the higher up you go in an organization, there better be people who knew you before you became a big shot. Because on the way to becoming a big shot, there will be people that are going to start to say, Harry, you're remarkable. Harry, you're amazing. If Harry's not careful, Harry could start to believe it. All right. And that's the end of it. Why? Because, go back one more time. If it's this whole idea of leadership, influence, relate, most people do not relate well to egomaniacs. Most people don't relate well to narcissists. Okay. And I think you start to realize every single person matters. Right. And before we open this up for questions on any topic that you'd like to talk about, what I usually do, and won't do this because I won't be able to see people's hands, but I usually end talks with large groups and I'll say, how many of you really want to be leaders? Everybody raises their hand. How many of you think you actually relate well to people? Everybody raises their hand. I say, all right, now don't raise your hand this time, but when you walk into the global hub, how many of you know and say hello to Rachel and Ken at the front desk? Okay. Thank them for what they're doing. How many of you, when you go into the cafeteria at Kellogg or wherever you're working, you know the names of the people in the cafeteria and what their favorite sport teams are? Right. And then how many of you, if you happen to be there late at night, because we have a tendency to be there at late night sometimes, when the cleaning crew's coming in, how many of you just take 2 or 3, 5 minutes and empty out a couple trash bags and say hello to thank them for what they're doing? I love to do that at night. And the reason I do it, if I'm honest, has nothing to do with being a nice guy. I do it because it gives me a moment of self-reflection to realize what for me is the obvious. If it wasn't for luck, timing, the team, mentors, and the man upstairs, I could easily be, okay, part of the maintenance group, okay? So I never forget where I came from, and you never, ever forget the people that helped you. And that's why when I say genuinely, every single person matters. Every single person matters, okay? So that's the summary, okay, of one of my 30-hour classes, okay? So, and we did it in 35 minutes, which basically means we've got a lot of time for questions. And we can either talk about some of the things I've mentioned, or honestly, particularly as Kellogg folks, we can talk about anything, because in my mind, there are no sensitive topics. That's an interesting one, by the way. Often, oh, well, Harry, I don't, that's a sensitive topic. But you know what? If you're a leader in a respectful way, seek to understand before understood, we ought to be able to talk about anything. So, and by the way, I didn't even warn Jennifer about this, but since leadership, a big part of leadership is delegation. and Jennifer's heard me speak before. If you ask me something pretty simple, pretty straightforward, I'll take it on. But if it's really complicated, I may just have to delegate it to Jennifer to answer. So we'll see how this goes. So, I could talk for another hour, Jennifer, but I prefer to sort of take some questions, and people can just kind of jump in. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a lot of questions, a lot of interest in the reflective questions that you ask yourself, and we're hearing more about those. So if we just could jump in and ask a related question, how do you keep track of all you have on your plate so nothing drops?
Yeah, well, I'm one of these people. I keep a lot of lists. I literally make sure that I look at that 168, okay, every month and literally ask myself, okay, am I allocating enough time to what I say is really most important in my life? Okay. I feel like, I often feel, Jennifer, like I just got out of Kellogg like 4 or 5 years ago. And my wife, Julie, says, no, it was 45 years ago. And I say, Julie, it was 45 years ago for you too. We were there together. Okay. Which always creates interest because she'll like to tell our children she's all 35 years old, which is getting complicated because her oldest daughter is 35 years old and graduated from Kellogg 2 years ago. So the way I try to do this, Jennifer, is on a nightly basis. I go through what I call a self appraisal. Okay, and mine literally goes like this, Jennifer, and we can send this out to folks, but it literally goes like this. What did I say I was going to do today? What did I actually do? What am I proud of? What am I not proud of? How did I lead people? How did I follow people? If I lived today over again, what would I have done differently? And then the last one is if I have tomorrow, knowing fully well aware, Jennifer, sooner or later I won't, but if I do have tomorrow and I'm a learning person, based on what I learned today, what would I operate and do differently on my job, my career, my family, my spirituality, whatever that happens to be? And folks will say to me, Jennifer, well, do you do this every day? I do it every day. I'm not a morning person. I do it at night. I carve out 15 minutes. And that's kind of important for me, Jennifer, because if I said I do it for half an hour, I could easily rationalize I don't have a half an hour. Hard to rationalize I don't have 15 minutes. And usually a student will say, well, do you do this every night? I said, well, yeah. I mean, everybody on this call, I'm going to guess, probably takes a couple of minutes to brush your teeth every night. So it's a habit. And so this is a habit. And somebody will say, do you have to write it down? I don't think you have to write it down. I do. Just a couple of notes in a journal. Why? Because if I don't write it down, am I daydreaming or am I self-reflecting, particularly if I've had a couple of glasses of wine? It could get a little confusing, Jennifer, exactly what's going on. So, and I'll be happy to send out those questions. And somebody usually will say, well, when did you start this? And interestingly enough, Jennifer, I actually started this when I was at Kellogg, because a long story, but I had the opportunity to attend a 3-day silent retreat the first week of December, which had a pretty enormous impact on me because believe it or not, for the last now, I guess it's 45 years, wherever I am in the world, the first weekend in December for 3.5 days, I fly to St. Paul, Minnesota, and attend this 3-day silent retreat, which for me, it's a little bit like all of us where we have a strategic plan for our organization and we have an operational plan. And it occurred to me, why wouldn't you do the same thing for yourself? So once a year, I take the time to figure out, no kidding around, how can I be a better leader, a better professor, a better board member, a better father, a better spouse, in my case, a better Christian. And then I have my little operational 15-minute check-in. And as I said earlier, what it does, Jennifer, it simplifies everything. It has an enormous impact on reducing worry, fear, anxiety, pressure, and stress.
That's so interesting. And interestingly enough, we actually have a question about your silent practice and talking about what key insights could you share with those looking to integrate deeper reflection into their leadership practice?
Yeah, boy, oh boy, Jennifer, this one's so key. I think very often, my opinion is because we're moving so fast, we don't really take the time to figure out what we're doing and why. And that ability to slow down and ask yourself, okay, what really is my purpose? What am I really trying to do? And so a really good example, Jennifer, is that as we all do well, often there's this view of, well, I'm just going to gather a whole lot more material things. I'm going to get a bigger car. I'm going to get a bigger house. Well, sort of interesting. You spend a lot of time doing this, But then as soon as you get a little older, all of a sudden it's like, wait a minute, what am I going to do with all this stuff? And, I got to pass it on to somebody or whatever. And I was very, very lucky because part of these discussions, at my retreats and thinking about it, reading a lot about it, what I realized was, take the time to figure out what really matters to you. I mean, how important are material things? Okay. My father had this great line he stole from somebody. It was called, he'd say, Harry, have you ever seen a hearse with a coffin in it go into a cemetery with a U-Haul attached to it? And I'd say, Dad, well, Harry, there's an awful lot of people, Harry. They must either believe all this stuff they're accumulating is going to go with them when they die, or they must think they're going to live forever. Because if neither of those are true, what are you doing with all of this stuff, right? And so, again, here's the balance. If you do really well, you want to treat yourself, great, super, okay? But he used to say, never be possessed by your possessions. And I'm sure we all run into a lot of people. They're so concerned about their third house in Aspen or this. It's like, really? You're looking for sympathy? There are people who don't even have a house. So, I mean, this putting it into perspective, all right? How important is your family? Now, if you say it's not, okay, but the number of people I run into, they'll say, oh, I can't believe it. I wish I had spent more time with my kids, but, Mary's going off to college. And it's like, did you not realize, like, when she was 12 years old, that 6 years later, she'd be going to college? I mean, are you surprised? I'm surprised you're surprised, right? So I guess one of the enormous benefits of all of this, Jennifer, is that if you start to think about this, it truly does minimize the surprise. And you ask yourself, okay, what really does matter? Okay. And it sounds so simple, Jennifer, but because we're in this race and we're not sure where we're racing to or why, I think it gets pretty problematic. But I got to tell you, it really, truly impacts how you live your life, how you lead others, how you deal with it. This the whole life balance piece.
Great. Thank you. We also
Yeah.
have a lot of questions relating to applying the values-based leadership to various scenarios in the business world. And so one of the themes, there are a lot of them, so I'll summarize them a little bit, but one of them is, what do you do if either your manager is not a values-based leader or you're leading a team of others who don't necessarily share the same values that you have?
Sure. Okay. Jennifer, this is a big one. We talk about this one with executives all the time. And let's break it into two pieces. Okay. So if I'm the leader and there's people on my team that aren't having the values, in my mind, that's the easy part. And the reason I say it's the easy part is if I'm the leader, I have a moral responsibility to lay out clearly what the values are, how we're going to operate, what's acceptable and what isn't. And I have a little formula that I use, Jennifer, that I recommend folks, and I can lay it out for folks. I do it sometimes. I put them on those blog posts, by the way, if they want to look at harrykraemer.org, by the way, Jennifer. Here's the 4 steps. Number 1, I set a clear expectation. Number 2, I communicate that expectation over and over and over again. Number 3, we hold one another accountable. And number 4, there's consequences. Okay. If I follow those 4 steps, and you work for me, Jennifer, I'm going to make it really, really clear what's acceptable and what isn't. I'm going to communicate it. We're going to have an open discussion because I feel an obligation, Jennifer. If you do something that's not consistent with the values and you didn't realize it was inconsistent, I have a hard time hassling you because I didn't make it very clear. Okay. I try to minimize the assumptions. We all grow up differently, Jennifer. We're in different parts of the world, different nationalities, everything else. I'm going to make it really clear. So my team, I am going to be a phenomenal, effective communicator to minimize surprise. Now, the second one, clearly more interesting, and I would say more challenging, is what about the person above you? Okay, so now, Jennifer, I work for you, and there's something you're doing that isn't consistent with my values. Well, here's my 2 steps. Number 1, I could leave. I could just leave. But it's interesting, Jennifer. My first thought, that's why it's an opinion. If I'm a value-based leader, okay, I feel an obligation to maybe have an impact on you, maybe through my behavior, maybe by the way I do things, maybe by in a very respectful way, say, hey, Jennifer, rather than you screaming at the whole group when this one person's an issue, maybe, Jennifer, you should just take that one person into your office and close the door, and maybe I can influence you. So I don't give up immediately. I first say, can I influence you? But if I can't influence you, okay, I'm not a big fan of Don Quixote, right? I mean, I'm looking at the windmill thing. So if If I don't think I can influence you and it truly is a value, I'm going to have to leave. And by the way, here's something, Jennifer, we talk a lot about because people get very confused related to values. In fact, we spend a class time saying, well, what are we really talking about? And it's interesting, Jennifer, it's sometimes good to explain what are not values or what the difference is. So for example, there's a big difference between values and preferences. I may say, Jennifer, I have a preference that we don't use four-letter words. That's a preference I have. Now, if you do, I'm going to let you know I don't like it, but I don't know if I'm going to fire you, okay? But if something is a value, two key things. One, they're not negotiable. And number two, I'll never compromise. See, because if I'm willing to negotiate or willing to compromise, how could they be a value, right? So I look at it very, very differently, whether I'm looking at the people who work for me or whether my boss is up there.
Yeah, interesting. Related to that, we also have some questions about how do you apply this when you're either looking for people to hire or when you yourself are looking for a new position?
Wow. Okay. Two more interesting things. Okay. When I'm trying to hire somebody, believe it or not, I get asked all the time, Harry, what's your script for an interview? Well, guess what? People just heard it for the last 45 minutes. If I'm interviewing you, Jennifer, I'm trying to figure out, is this woman capable of keeping things simple and cutting through the morass? Does she have effective communication in terms of common sense? Is she looking for somebody else to get it done? Or does she feel like she's one of those guys, one of the people who's going to make it? You're not watching the movie. You're in the movie. You're active. Do I feel as I'm interviewing you that you're self-reflective and you know yourself? Do you seem to have a balanced perspective? And I'll ask questions just searching out whether or not I think you've got a balanced perspective. True self-confidence, I'm going to really try to figure out, are you willing to admit what you don't know? I'll ask you questions, Jennifer, I know you don't know the answer to, just to see whether you're willing to tell me you don't know. And then when I ask, genuinely one of the easiest ones, when I ask you what you've accomplished, if it turns out you've accomplished everything like all by yourself, oh, is there anybody else involved? I mean, is this all you? So that's the way I look at it when I'm trying to hire people. That I find that to be very helpful. And what was the other part, Jennifer? That was
Just
one part.
when you yourself are looking for a position, how do you sort of screen?
Yeah, okay. Well, you know what? This is really an interesting one. So when I'm looking at a position, and by the way, whether it's a position in an organization or now, because I'm always serving on 5 or 6 boards, if somebody asks me to go on a board, what I really want to do is I want to find somebody, not only the people that are on the board, but I love to find somebody, this is the key for me, Jennifer, somebody who was in the company, but no longer is, or was on the board and no longer is. And the great question I would ask if that happened to be you is, well, did you leave because, hey, it was a great experience and you wouldn't have been able to move up to now what you're now doing if it hadn't been for that? Or, wow, this is hell on wheels, Harry. You wouldn't believe how bad that was. I want to find people that I respect that have been there and that are no longer there. See, in the beginning, I thought I'll find people that I know well that are there. But then I realized, but if you're still there.
Hi, Harry's not able to get back on, unfortunately. So we just want to thank everybody for joining and sending so many fabulous questions. And we really enjoyed hosting this session today. Thank you so much.